Hi, welcome back to another episode of the August Critique. Here we'll be reviewing movies, animes, and other television shows. I'll be sharing my thoughts, opinions, and comments. In this week's episode, I want to continue with season 4 of The Handmaid's Tale. The events are split between June and the other handmaids in Gilead and the American refugees living in Canada. The Americans fortunate enough to find refuge in Canada are not having an easy time reintegrating into what resembles a normal life. Moira and Emily are coping the best they can with dealing with the trauma inflicted on them in Gilead. However, they are not the only ones trying to cope. Their work with other survivors exposes them to many men, women, and children and families trying to cope and reassemble their lives. In this episode, we see another familiar face, which happens to be Rita, previously the Waterford's Martha. And if we remember, a Martha is essentially a maid or domestic caretaker who looks after the home. We see Rita as she's addressing a Canadian crowd, recounting her ordeal and the Angel's Flight that June organized, which rescued her and nearly 86 children from Gilead. It looks like a fundraiser in order to collect money to help support services that will get more people out of Gilead and help people get settled once they escape. As Rita is talking, I can't help but notice that she seems shaken and a bit timid as she addresses the crowd. We can attribute this to just being nervous, but I think it's a little bit more than that. As viewers see Rita on the screen from time to time, she's kind of a minor character, so we only get a few glimpses into her experiences. Like anyone from Gilead, she has suffered her own personal traumas that she's dealing with. And even though Gilead is no paradise island, I think in some ways Rita, along with others, miss it. Obviously not the abuse of power and constant threat of capital punishment. She comes off as a naturally nurturing person and enjoys many of the different tasks of a homemaker, and also seems like she is genuinely a God-fearing woman. I think she, like many others, is just trying to make sense of her new environment and still figure out how to move forward. Speaking of moving forward, we are introduced to another character named Asher. We meet him through Moira as she's trying to work with his family in order to help him get settled in Canada. Asher is one of the many children rescued from Gilead. However, he's not adjusting well. Asher, whose real name is James, is now living with his aunt, and he misses his home in Gilead. He misses his house, his old toys, his Martha, and the only people he knows as his parents. Moira tries to speak with him, and he asks Moira if he'll ever see any of them again. And Moira gives him an honest answer and tells him no. As viewers, it's easy for us to see all the evil things done within Gilead and want to denounce the country. We don't see many of the positive images of Gilead. For a child, it may be an extremely confusing situation. We have to consider that kids have a very limited and sheltered viewpoint of what goes on in the country. Although the people who raised them, Asher, aka James, are not his biological parents, they were the only family that he knew, which is another sad reality of Gilead. Hundreds, if not thousands, of children have been displaced and taken from their original families or born from handmaids. It may seem like the right thing to do to reunite the kids with their families. However, it is not that simple or easy. Kids are so impressionable, and their early years set a course and standard for their lives going forward. Of course, you can adjust to go against your upbringing, but it's very difficult. Asher just misses what is familiar to him, and it's going to take him a while to adjust. To help with the transition, Moira introduces Rita to Asher and arranges for her to stay the night with him and his aunt. Rita offers to make some meals from back home and gives him a small toy from Gilead. I think this is therapeutic not only for Asher but for Rita too. Asher gets a familiar reminder of home while Rita gets to slip back into her familiar role as caretaker. Although Gilead may not be the best place, this provides a small comfort to them both. June, on the other hand, is still on the run from Gilead, trying to make it to a safe place and get as far away as possible from the eyes and to avoid being taken back to the Red Center. The women try to get in contact with Mayday, which is made up of people within Gilead trying to raise up against the government. June leaves the farm to meet up with the contact at a manor in the countryside. The manor is basically another version of Jezebel's. If you recall, Jezebel was essentially a brothel that commanders and other top ranking men within the government frequent to party and unwind. The women there are not free. They are given small creature comforts like cocktail dresses and alcohol, but they are subject to the men who frequent the establishment. I find this very hypocritical if you ask me, since Gilead is supposed to follow the teachings outlined in the Old Testament and uphold a certain moral standard. June ends up here in order to get information on the next safe house for her and the handmaids to hide out in. While trying to talk to the contact, June is told that she was in Boston back at the former Jezebel, but was shipped out there after June killed Commander Winslow. Not only is it bad enough that a place like Jezebel even exists in the first place, but the men in charge seem to not have learned their lesson. Instead of getting rid of places like that, they are driven by their carnal desires and fantasies and just relocate the operation. Although places like that aren't publicized, it's supported by forced labor of the Marthas and the participation of the aunt. In this episode, we see one aunt who's only worried about the girls fulfilling their roles to serve the men. Later on in the episode, we see June and Esther having a conversation. June learns from Esther that she's been giving her husband a mild poison in order to keep him docile. She asks Esther to teach her more about the poison. And from here, we see June's plot for helping the women at Jezebel begin to form. She ends up returning to Jezebel's with a toxic concoction. It takes a bit of convincing, but her contact finally agrees to spread the poison. They put it in the commander's liquor and in the aunt's tea. After this, we see a satisfied June heading back to the farm. As June and her driver get closer to the farm, she senses that something is wrong. The driver tells her that he's not leaving her, which I find to be a noble and loyal act. But as they approach the farm, he is quickly shot by the other guardians. They have June at gunpoint, but fortunately they do not shoot. Although June was captured, the other handmaids are still on the run. In this scene, we also see Nick leading the guardians that captured June. As he approaches, he says that he is trying to keep her safe. We know from past seasons that June and Nick have had a romantic relationship and they share a daughter. He has always been in June's corner, helping her along the way. But to be honest, I'm starting to question Nick. It was one thing when he was in Waterford's driver and also an eye. However, we see Nick beginning to rise in the ranks, and now he is leading his own troop of guardians. I question if he really is in June's corner. It makes me wonder what kind of things Nick has done in order to gain more power within Gilead. And as he raises up the ladder, I can't see how his relationship with June would help him. She's basically public enemy number one in Gilead and constantly defying and undermining the power structure of the country. If anything, his affiliation with June should hinder him. If he is truly on her side, then having a powerful male figure within the government will prove to be beneficial. However, I think it is too soon to tell what Nick's true intentions are. We can't talk about this episode without mentioning the Waterfords, who are still in prison in Canada. In this episode, we start to see the couple begin to unravel and fall apart. There's a growing division between them, and they are becoming more hostile and aggressive between each other. Serena wants Fred to drop the charges against her, so she goes to speak with him in the chapel at the facility that the two of them are being held in. Fred, like many other commanders from Gilead, is a hypocrite. As viewers, we have seen in past seasons many of the transgressions that Fred has committed, yet he still talks about God. I feel like he only brings up God when it is beneficial to him and when he wants to make some grandiose speech to win people over to his side. Many of his actions have been ungodly. Throughout the course of the conversation, Fred is not falling for Serena's pleas to drop the charges. and he instead doubles down by threatening to keep Serena away from Nicole, who, as a reminder, is the daughter of June and Nick. It's safe to say after the conversation that Fred and Serena are only looking out for what's in each other's own best interest and ready to throw the other under the bus if needed. But that isn't all that we find out about the Waterfords. Right at the end of the episode, we find out that Serena Joy's pregnant, which is a major shocker. Number one, we were under the impression that Serena could not get pregnant. In the last season, we saw that Serena was injured in an attack, but when her and Fred were promoting their ideals before Gilead to take over of the US, the infertility issues between Fred and Serena are what prompted them to get a handmaid in the first place. Considering everything that June was subjected to by the Waterfords in their desperation and obsession with having a child, I wonder how this will affect not only Serena, but June. Since Serena and Fred are both in custody, it seems unlikely that they will be raising their own child. I guess it all depends on how their trial goes and whether or not they are set free, considering all their crimes. Considering everything that June was subjected to by the Waterfords and their desperation and obsession with having a child, I wonder how this will affect not only Serena but June. Since Serena and Fred are both in custody, it seems like they are unlikely to be the ones who will be raising their child. I guess it all depends on how their trial goes and whether or not they are set free considering all their crimes. Perhaps now Serena will be a bit more sympathetic to June and all the other handmaids. I think having a child of her own that she gives birth to will change Serena. And the thought of that child being taken away from her will force her to view herself and Gilead in a new light. I also wonder if Serena will try to go after Nicole. Although we have seen her express her love for the child, she's not accessible to Serena. And now that Serena can have a child of her own, one that is biologically hers, I think that it will divert her attention away from Nicole. That was my take on the episode. I would love to know what you all think down in the comments section. Thanks again for tuning in to another video, and please like, share, and comment. See you next time.